Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the shadowed streets of ancient Egypt, the sand cooling under your bare feet, the Nile breeze carrying the faint scent of yeast and roasting grains. In the distance, the glow of oil lamps flickers around mud brick houses, and someone nearby is grinding barley on a heavy stone quern. You can almost hear the low, rhythmic scrape as flour dust drifts into the air, catching torchlight like golden mist. A jug of frothy beer sits half hidden in the shade, while a basket of rough, uneven loaves waits for hungry hands. The funny part? This bread and beer, the proud backbone of Egypt's daily diet, wasn't always the picture of health. In fact, you could almost call it their version of junk food. Imagine eating a crust so full of grit from the grinding stones that you'd be chewing sandpaper with every bite. And that beer? Cloudy, chunky, and sweet, something like half-fermented oatmeal water. You probably won't survive this. At least not without a toothache, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know down in the comments, where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along a beaten path, following the clatter of voices as families gather for their evening meal. Bread is everywhere, thick, heavy loaves shaped like cones or discs, blackened on the outside and dense inside. You tear one open and notice how coarse the texture feels. It's filling, yes, but every bite carries tiny shards of ground stone. Over time, that grit wore down teeth until even young adults had molars that looked like they'd been through a rock tumbler. Archaeologists digging through mummies often find jawbones with abscesses, cavities, and teeth ground down to the root. That's the hidden junk food side of Egypt's staff of life. Next to the bread comes the beer, because in Egypt, water wasn't always safe, but beer. That was liquid bread. Thick with barley mash, often sweetened with dates, it wasn't the crisp golden drink you might imagine today. Instead, it was closer to a meal you could pour, drunk through straws to avoid the floating clumps. Workers building pyramids received rations of both bread and beer, sometimes gallons of it in a single day. Historians still argue whether that was meant as fair nutrition or just an easy way to keep workers full, tipsy, and obedient. Either way, it gave everyone a buzz along with their dinner, as you sit cross-legged by the fire. You notice how repetitive this diet must have been. Bread and beer every day, every meal, with slight changes in shape or seasoning. To spice things up, people added herbs, seeds, or honey when they could. Some loaves even contained fruit bits, early attempts at flavored snack bread. Imagine grabbing what looks like a sweet roll at the market, only to bite into something as dense as a brick and packed with mystery grit. A treat. But also a dental hazard, one quirky tidbit. Bread molds often formed naturally in the hot climate, and Egyptians didn't always throw moldy loaves away. Some scholars think they may have unknowingly used this for medicinal purposes, like a primitive antibiotic. So, the same food that rotted teeth might also have saved lives in roundabout ways. The family beside you laughs, children smearing barley paste on each other's faces while parents sip their beer. You taste a mouthful of the frothy drink, sweet, sour, with a slight vinegar bite, and it clings to your tongue. Not elegant, not refined, but addictive. Like grabbing a greasy fast food burger today, it's cheap, quick, and everybody's comfort staple. No one thinks about the long-term effects, the worn-down teeth, the bloated stomachs, or the malnutrition hidden beneath the fullness. The truth is, Egyptians loved this cycle of bread and beer. It fed the workers, the priests, even the pharaohs themselves. Tomb walls are painted with scenes of bakers kneading, brewers straining, and endless baskets of loaves offered to the gods. You wonder if maybe the gods themselves were imagined as junk food lovers, accepting piles of bread and rivers of beer instead of balanced meals. You lean back, full but not entirely satisfied, already craving something different. Your mind drifts to the sweeter stalls you saw earlier, where honey drips from cakes, figs glisten in the torchlight, and fried treats sizzle in pans of goose fat. But for now, your jaw aches slightly from the gritty bread, and your head swims softly from the beer's warmth. The Nile breeze ruffles your hair, carrying the scent of yeast, smoke, and roasting grain, and you realize that junk food has always been part of the human story, even here, thousands of years before the word junk existed. You shuffle away from the smoky bread ovens, your fingers still dusty with flour, and drift toward the sweeter corner of the market. Here, the air grows thicker, heavier, almost sticky as it clings to your skin. Bees hover lazily in the torchlight, drawn to wide bowls of golden honey. In Egypt, honey isn't just a sweetener, it's liquid sunshine, harvested from carefully kept hives or gathered from wild swarms tucked into crevices along the Nile cliffs. And when that honey drizzles over baked dough or sticky little cakes, you've basically stumbled into the ancient equivalent of junk food heaven. A woman in a linen dress plucks one of these treats from a tray, a small pastry, round. Fried until golden, then dunked in warm honey until it glistens like amber glass. You bite in and feel the crunch give way to syrupy sweetness that coats your teeth and tongue. It's dangerously addictive, and you suddenly understand why Egyptians wrote hymns to bees. Honey wasn't just dessert, it was medicine, an offering to the gods, and the luxury sugar rush of the ancient world. Mainstream fact. Honey cakes often appeared in temple offerings, piled high as bribes for divine favor. Priests presented them to Osiris, Ra, and Hathor, with the hope that sweetness could coax blessings out of stern gods. Imagine slipping the gods a plate of donuts and saying, "Here, maybe now you'll listen." Practical, but a little cheeky, quirky tidbit. Honey wasn't just eaten, it was used in love spells and even as ancient skincare. Some women mixed it with crushed lotus petals to make sweet-smelling salves, basically ancient beauty masks. If you're picturing Cleopatra lounging with a honey facial while nibbling on honey-glazed pastries, you're probably not too far off. Historians still argue whether these honey treats were widely available or reserved mostly for the elite. The evidence is scattered. Some recipes appear in fragments of texts, and tomb paintings suggest the wealthy indulged often, but archaeologists also find honey residue in humble village jars. Maybe it was like chocolate in the early 20th century, still special, but sneaking its way into everyone's life. You walk further into the crowd, and children tug on their parents' robes, pointing at stalls selling little pastries shaped like animals or flowers. Bakers pour honey over cones of ground nuts, making sticky clusters that resemble modern nut brittle. The sweetness feels indulgent in a land where most meals taste of barley, onions, and leeks. A simple honey cake could light up a whole festival day. You lean against a post, licking honey from your fingers. A worker nearby complains that his rations never include honey, only bread and beer, unless it's a holiday. He stares longingly at the cakes, and you realize junk food, then as now, always carried a hint of longing, something you crave but can't always afford. Egyptians didn't have vending machines, but they did have market stalls where vendors whispered, "Just one more cake, you deserve it." The bees buzz louder around the trays, and the baker swats them away with a bundle of reeds. He laughs, saying honey is worth fighting over, whether it's bees or children begging for another bite. You nod, your teeth aching slightly from the sugar, but your stomach humming with the comfort of something sweet. It strikes you that while honey is natural, the way Egyptians used it turned it into their first candy addiction. No processed sugar yet, but this golden syrup carried the same role: cheap joy, sticky fingers, and a smile that came with cavities waiting in the background. You remember the bread and beer, so coarse and heavy, and now realize how perfectly these honey cakes balanced them out. Sweet against sour, sticky against gritty, Egyptian junk food was all about contrast. You toss the last crumb into your mouth, savoring how it melts across your tongue. Around you, laughter and music swell, drums thumping, voices singing hymns that blur into the night. Bees drift off as the fires die down, and you're left with the aftertaste of sugar and smoke, realizing that even here, thousands of years ago, people chased sweetness just as much as we do today. You wander a little deeper into the bustling market, your fingers still sticky with traces of honey, and now you catch another smell, rich, fruity, with a faintly fermented tang. A row of baskets stands open, overflowing with dried figs, glistening dates, and little parcels wrapped neatly in palm leaves. Unlike the coarse bread or the rare honey cakes, these are the everyday munchies, sweet, chewy, and cheap enough that even the lower classes could enjoy them when luck allowed. If honey was the flashy candy bar, then figs and dates were the trail mix, always there, always tempting. You pick up a fig, its skin wrinkled like soft leather, and bite into it. The inside bursts with tiny seeds that crunch faintly between your teeth, while the sugary pulp clings to your tongue. It's delicious, but dangerously Moorish. Once you eat one, you want another, and another. Egyptians knew this too. Tomb paintings often show figs piled into offering baskets, as if no afterlife could possibly be endured without a stash of chewy snacks. Mainstream fact. Figs and dates were a staple food, but they doubled as sweet treats, often stuffed with nuts or honey. That's right, ancient Egyptians had a kind of proto-energy bar, a sticky fig crammed with almonds or walnuts, maybe rolled in more honey for good measure. Imagine unwrapping that during a long shift hauling stones at Giza. Not exactly a protein bar, but close enough to keep your energy spiking. Quirky tidbit. Some Egyptians fermented dates into a sweet, boozy syrup. People sometimes used it as a dip for bread or as an additive to beer. So yes, figs and dates weren't just snacks, they could also sneakily get you tipsy. Picture ancient kids sneaking a bit of date syrup and running around buzzing like they'd just downed a can of soda. Historians still argue whether figs were primarily farmed for common consumption or whether they remained a prestige crop. Archaeological digs reveal fig seeds in humble houses, yet written records often emphasize them in royal gardens. Maybe, like seasonal fruit today, they drifted between classes depending on harvests and trade. You pause by one vendor who offers dates stuffed with roasted sesame seeds. The taste is richer, nuttier, almost like modern candy bars with caramel and peanuts. You realize that the human urge to combine sugar and crunch is nothing new. Our ancestors already nailed the concept long before peanuts met chocolate in a wrapper. Children dart past you, giggling, their mouths smeared with fig paste. One little boy waves a sticky palm leaf at you. Inside it's packed with mashed dates pressed into a solid bar. You take a nibble and nearly laugh. This is literally an ancient granola bar, minus the wrapper. No preservatives, no shiny label, just sugar and fiber wrapped in leaves. Still, your jaw works overtime chewing through the dense sweetness, and you can already feel the sugar hitting your bloodstream. A passing priest mutters about figs being sacred to Hathor, goddess of joy and music. You wonder if that's because figs themselves bring joy, or because, like music, they can get you high on rhythm and sugar at the same time. Either way, figs show up everywhere, painted in murals, stacked in offerings, tucked into baskets for journeys. People knew they were portable, tasty, and kept well, a junk food survival kit before potato chips existed. As you wipe your fingers clean on your linen sash, you can't help but notice how even the healthier Egyptian snacks carried the same issues as today's treats. Lots of sugar, quick energy, then the inevitable crash. Maybe workers chewed them while hauling blocks, their bodies demanding bursts of fuel, or priests nibbled them in temple courtyards between rituals. But the end result was the same: smiles, sticky fingers, and teeth quietly rotting in the background. You glance back at the honey stalls and the bread ovens, then forward at the piles of figs and dates, and realize that each step deeper into Egyptian junk food just gets sweeter, stickier, and a little more dangerous for your molars. And with the festival drums starting up again in the distance, you can bet people aren't stopping at just one bite. You wander closer to the Nile's edge now, where torches flicker on the water and the stalls thin out into little mats spread with river plants. The air carries a sharper, greener scent, wet reeds, lily stems, and lotus blossoms. Here, the junk food looks a little stranger. Instead of honey-dripping cakes or chewy figs, you see bowls piled with seeds, pods, and crispy slices that crackle faintly when you touch them. These are lotus seeds and lily chips, the Nile's hidden snacks, harvested from the same plants that artists painted endlessly on tomb walls. You pick up a handful of lotus seeds. They look a bit like chickpeas, pale and round, with tiny dimples where the stem once clung. When roasted over clay stoves, they pop lightly, becoming crisp, nutty little bites. You toss one into your mouth, it crunches satisfyingly, almost like popcorn, though earthier, with a faint aftertaste of river mud. Children nearby giggle as they chew fistfuls, spitting shells onto the ground, their laughter carrying over the lap of water against the bank, mainstream fact. Lotus seeds and rhizomes were a common part of the Egyptian diet, harvested from the Nile's marshes. People ground them into flour, boiled them for stews, or, when they wanted a treat, fried or roasted them for snacks. Tomb paintings show baskets of lotus plants offered alongside bread and beer, as if even the gods liked to nibble during the divine late-night hours. Quirky tidbit: some seeds were rumored to have mild narcotic effects, leading later writers to spin tales about lotus eaters drifting in dreamy stupor. Was that real or just Greek exaggeration? Hard to say. But imagine munching a bowl of seeds at a festival and feeling slightly too relaxed, like ancient chill pills disguised as snack food. Historians still argue whether lotus snacks were everyday munchies or more ceremonial, tied to temple rituals and feasts. Archaeological remains show lotus seeds in simple village homes, yet their heavy presence in art makes some scholars suspect they carried symbolic weight. Were they just the popcorn of the Nile, or sacred festival food? The debate lingers. You turn toward another tray where strips of dried lily tubers have been fried until brittle, resembling rustic potato chips. You take one, crunch down, and nearly laugh. It's thin, salty, a little bitter, and completely addictive. Vendors sprinkle crushed herbs over them, selling paper cones of lily chips to festival goers. Children run past, clutching cones like carnival popcorn, while older men dip theirs into little bowls of garlic paste. Suddenly you realize that fast food wasn't born in a neon-lit diner, it floated here on the Nile, carried by lilies. The smell is irresistible, smoky from the fire, sharp from the herbs, faintly sweet from the natural starch. You lick your fingers, and a thin layer of oil clings to them, shining in the moonlight. Like today's chips, they're messy, salty, and designed to keep you reaching for more. One cone becomes two, and before long your stomach is fuller than you intended. A fisherman beside you boasts that the Nile provides everything: fish for protein, reeds for mats, and lilies for snacks. He holds out a fried tuber slice and says it's the best food for long nights on the water. You can almost picture him crouched in a boat, munching quietly while waiting for the tug of a net, passing time the same way someone today might munch sunflower seeds at a baseball game. Some vendors also sell a sweeter version: lotus seeds coated in date syrup, sticky clusters bound together into chewy little balls. You take one and find yourself in a sugar crunch limbo, half candy, half roasted nut. The syrup seeps into the cracks of your teeth, and you wince, already imagining the ancient dentist shaking his head at yet another ruined molar. As the drums from the festival drift louder, you glance back at the stalls: bread and beer filling bellies, honey cakes sticking to fingers, figs clinging to teeth, and now lotus and lily snacks adding crunch to the mix. Junk food in ancient Egypt wasn't just about sugar, it was also about texture, the thrill of a satisfying bite, the kind of food you ate standing up, laughing, walking along the riverbank. And as you toss another seed into your mouth, hearing the faint crack beneath your teeth, you can't help but smile. Thousands of years later, humans still crave that same sound, that same crunch. The crowd shifts, and you drift with it, leaving behind the lotus crunch and stepping into a cloud of much stronger aromas. The sharp tang hits first, sulfurous, pungent, eye-watering. Someone nearby cracks open a bundle of fresh onions, and suddenly the whole square feels like a cookout gone rogue. You blink, your eyes stinging slightly, and realize you've stumbled into the Egyptian love affair with onions, garlic, and leeks. Everywhere you look, people are munching on these vegetables raw, roasted, or stewed, chewing them with such gusto you wonder how anyone survived without mint gum. A farmer sits cross-legged, happily crunching into a raw onion the way you might bite into an apple. You raise your eyebrows, but he grins, teeth flashing, clearly proud of his snack. To him, this isn't just food, it's medicine, protection, and comfort rolled into one bulb. Mainstream fact. Onions, garlic, and leeks were staples of the Egyptian diet, eaten daily by both rich and poor. They were cheap, easy to grow, and believed to boost health and stamina. Records even suggest workers building the pyramids were fed regular rations of onions and garlic, supposedly to keep their strength up under the desert sun. You picture laborers lined up, chewing raw garlic until their breath could probably knock a pharaoh off his throne. Quirky tidbit. Onions weren't just eaten, they were sacred. Egyptians buried onions with the dead, sometimes even placing them in eye sockets of mummies. Why? Perhaps the layered rings symbolized eternal life, or maybe they just thought the afterlife was going to be seriously bland without flavor. Either way, onions earned a place alongside gold and amulets in tombs. Imagine waking up in eternity and your first possession is an onion. Historians still argue whether onions were valued more for their taste or their symbolic power. Some claim their strong scent made them protective against evil spirits. Others think they were just practical, a cheap food with long storage life. Maybe both are true. Ancient Egyptians weren't above giving spiritual meaning to the same snack that made their eyes water every night. You grab a roasted leek from a vendor's tray. The charred outer layers peel away easily, revealing tender, smoky flesh inside. The flavor is strong, almost sweet, but still clings to your tongue long after you swallow. Beside you, a man dips garlic cloves in honey, popping them into his mouth like candy. He offers you one. And you hesitate, then bite down. The taste explodes, sweet and fiery all at once, a bizarre blend that somehow works. Your breath, however, may never recover. The crowd laughs as children dare each other to chew raw cloves. One boy grimaces, his face puckered, before proudly declaring he feels as strong as Horus. You smile, realizing garlic was their version of a power-up snack, tiny, fiery bites that made you feel invincible, but it wasn't all fun. Too much garlic or onion could upset the stomach, and tomb texts sometimes complain about the stink of garlic breath. You imagine priests whispering complaints as worshippers flooded temples after heavy onion dinners, and suddenly the gods might have had a reason to stay silent. The smell clings to you now, weaving into your linen robes, seeping into your skin. No wonder Egyptian junk food didn't just affect teeth and bellies, it followed you everywhere, an invisible aura of flavor. You lick your lips, tasting the lingering bite of garlic, and think about how timeless this obsession really is. We still pile garlic on pizzas, onions on burgers, leeks into soups. The Egyptians might have smelled overwhelming, but in their hearts, they were foodies chasing the same bold flavors you crave late at night. You step back into the open air, trying to shake the sting from your eyes. Behind you, the crowd keeps crunching happily, chewing through bulbs and stalks like popcorn at a play. The Nile breeze helps, but faint wisps of onion still trail you as you move, as if the gods themselves wanted to remind you, no feast, no snack, and no life in Egypt was ever complete without a little garlic breath. The onion haze drifts behind you, and the market takes on a different scent, something warmer, spicier, faintly exotic. The chatter shifts too. Instead of children clamoring for figs or vendors hawking bread, you hear whispers of distant caravans and merchants boasting of treasures brought across deserts and seas. You've stumbled into the stalls of exotic imports, the luxury flavor section of ancient Egypt's junk food scene. Here, little jars and packets sit displayed like jewels, cinnamon bark rolled into tight curls, black peppercorns gleaming like beads, and tiny nuggets of incense that blur the line between food and perfume. The air feels thicker, richer, carrying hints of cardamom, coriander, and perhaps even nutmeg. You lean in close, and the vendor grins, pinching a bit of cinnamon between his fingers before letting you inhale. The sweetness is dizzying, like spiced air itself. Mainstream fact. Egypt imported spices from as far as India and sub-Saharan Africa, trading gold, papyrus, and linen for seasonings that transformed otherwise plain food. Pepper, cinnamon, and cumin often ended up in temple offerings and elite kitchens, where they flavored meats, wines, and pastries. They weren't everyday fare for the average farmer, they were status symbols, sprinkled onto dishes to say, yes, I can afford flavor. Quirky tidbit. Some exotic spices doubled as aphrodisiacs. Cinnamon and fenugreek, in particular, were believed to spark desire. You imagine wealthy Egyptians nibbling on spiced cakes and winking knowingly at one another. Were they convinced the gods of love favored cinnamon rolls? Possibly. Or maybe people just liked the excuse to splurge on something that tasted good. Historians still argue whether the high price of imports restricted them to royal tables or if clever merchants diluted expensive spices with cheaper local herbs to spread them among the middle class. Archaeological residue of peppercorns in more modest homes suggests that spice, like honey, sometimes slipped past class lines. Still, there's no doubt that for the poor, pepper was a rare treat, maybe sprinkled only on festival days. You pick up a little pastry dusted with cinnamon. The crust is dense, but the spice tingles across your tongue, sharp and warm, making the bread taste suddenly indulgent instead of plain. This is Egypt's junk food in disguise, the same bread and honey as always, but dressed up with imported flair. You chew slowly, savoring, imagining what it must have cost, a bite of cinnamon equal to days of wages for a laborer. Nearby, a priest buys peppercorns wrapped in cloth, muttering about using them in temple incense. Spices weren't only for food, they scented perfumes, embalming oils, and offerings to the gods. You wonder if the gods noticed the difference between a loaf plain and a loaf dusted with cinnamon, or if they just smirked at human extravagance. Another vendor lets you taste pepper sprinkled on roasted fish. The heat creeps in slowly, warming your throat. You cough, then laugh, it's strangely familiar, like modern hot sauce. Around you, Egyptians fan their mouths, delighted by the sting. You realize that junk food, across cultures, always toys with extremes, too sweet, too salty, too spicy. The thrill is in going just a little too far. And of course, the gossip flows with the spice. Merchants brag about how caravans risked bandits and deserts to bring these tiny jars to market. Buyers boast about serving cinnamon bread at feasts, as if it were a crown jewel. Someone whispers that pharaohs themselves demanded pepper shipments as tribute from foreign lands. Even in the ancient world, clout came in the form of expensive snacks. You lick your fingers, catching the last trace of cinnamon. It's subtle compared to the sugar rush of honey cakes or the crunch of lotus chips, but it carries something those snacks lack, a sense of faraway adventure. Eating imported spice is like tasting the world beyond Egypt, a fleeting luxury wrapped into something as simple as bread. As the torches crackle, you realize the junk food stalls have begun to form a hierarchy: bread and beer for the masses, figs and honey for festivals, onions and garlic for the everyday worker, and spices for the wealthy who wanted their junk food dressed in finery. And in that moment, chewing your spiced bread, you feel the subtle pride that must have filled every Egyptian who could say, "Tonight, we feast not just like mortals, but like gods." You leave the spice stalls behind and follow the aroma of sizzling fat, the sound of crackling oil mixing with bursts of laughter. Smoke curls upward from clay pans set over small fires, and you suddenly feel like you've wandered into the greasy heart of ancient Egypt's junk food world. Here, goose fat and oil are the main players, transforming otherwise plain ingredients into golden, crispy, irresistible bites. A woman stirs a pot of bubbling fat, dropping small doughy lumps into it. The oil hisses, spits, and the smell is mouth-watering, rich, savory, slightly smoky. Moments later, she pulls the lumps out with wooden tongs, the outsides browned and glistening. She sprinkles them with herbs. Hands one to you, and you take a cautious bite. The crust shatters between your teeth, revealing soft, hot grain inside. You almost laugh, it's basically the ancestor of fried dumplings. And like all fried food, it's both comforting and dangerous, heavy enough to weigh in your belly after only a few bites. Mainstream fact. Goose fat was a prized cooking medium in ancient Egypt, used for frying bread, fish, and even vegetables. It gave everything a richer flavor, making ordinary rations taste indulgent. Oil, pressed from flax or imported sesame, also joined the mix, especially in wealthier homes. Fried food wasn't an everyday staple, but when it appeared, it was a true treat. Quirky tidbit. Egyptians sometimes flavored goose fat with herbs or even perfumed oils. Yes, actual perfumed oils. Some recipes describe using scented ingredients to fry bread, creating what might be the strangest version of a donut ever. Imagine biting into fried dough that tastes faintly of roses or myrrh. Was it delicious or disgusting? Hard to say, but somebody thought it was worth the effort. Historians still argue whether fried foods were common street fare or limited to festival settings. The evidence is scattered. Traces of oil in humble kitchens suggest some frying happened daily, while depictions of lavish feasts show platters of fried treats. Perhaps, like today's fried chicken, it crossed class lines, uniting everyone in a moment of crispy indulgence. You notice another vendor frying strips of bread dough until they puff into golden pillows. He sprinkles crushed dates on top, turning them into a proto-donut. Children crowd around, hands reaching eagerly, voices squeaking as they beg for more. You watch one little girl wolf down 3 in a row, her cheeks bulging. Her grin wide, and you realize that not much has changed. Fried dough has been irresistible for millennia. Next to her stall, a man sizzles fish fillets in goose fat, the skin crisping to a golden sheen. He presses a wedge of roasted garlic onto the fish before serving it, and you can almost smell the flavor layering itself in the air. Rich fat, sharp garlic, sweet flesh. You take a bite, and the crunch gives way to tender meat, the kind of food that feels sinful even when you know it's just dinner. The crowd here is louder, rowdier. Maybe it's the beer, maybe it's the frying, it feels more like a festival than a market. Greasy fingers wipe across tunics, children lick their hands clean. And vendors laugh as they pass out cone after cone of fried tidbits. You notice some laborers clutching fried grain cakes, eating as if they haven't seen food in days. It's quick, filling, and gives the same guilty satisfaction as fast food today. But as you lick your own fingers, you can feel the heaviness settle in your stomach. Ancient Egyptians might not have had words for cholesterol or heartburn, but they knew fried food slowed you down. Some texts even warn against overindulgence, suggesting that too much oil-laden bread makes the body sluggish. And you nod, imagining the groans of people stumbling away from this very stall, stuffed and sleepy. The smell lingers long after you've finished eating, clinging to your hair, your clothes, your skin. It's the same greasy perfume that hangs around modern fast food joints, comforting, tempting, and just a little shameful. You rub your hands on your linen sash, but the oil leaves a sheen that won't fade. Still, you can't help smiling. Fried treats feel timeless, like a universal human weakness. Standing there by the sizzling pans, you realize that ancient Egypt, for all its pyramids and gods, also had moments like this, crowds leaning over hot oil, waiting for that golden bite that made them forget everything else, if only for a little while. You wander deeper into the marketplace, your fingers still slick from goose fat, when you catch another scent, this one sharp and salty, mingling with the tang of river air. Following your nose, you arrive at a row of stalls where slabs of meat and strips of fish hang drying in the sun, some rubbed with herbs, others simply caked in crystalline salt. This is the world of fish jerky and salted meats, the salty snack aisle of ancient Egypt. A vendor greets you, pulling down a thin sheet of dried fish, its surface glistening white with salt crystals. He snaps off a piece and hands it over, and you chew cautiously. The flavor hits hard, salty, chewy, smoky from the Nile air. It's not refined. But it's oddly addictive, the kind of food you reach for again even as your tongue protests. You sip some water to balance it out, and you suddenly understand why this was such a hit. It's portable, it's filling, and once you start, it's hard to stop. Fish, of course, was one of Egypt's most abundant resources. The Nile teemed with tilapia, perch, and catfish, and people found ways to preserve them for leaner months. Drying, salting, and fermenting were common techniques. Evidence comes not just from papyri and murals, but from actual remnants found in tombs, dried fish offerings left for the afterlife, proof that even eternity needed a salty snack. Quirky tidbit. There's evidence of fermented fish paste. A pungent, almost proto-sauce, that Egyptians might have used as a dip or condiment. Imagine an ancestor of modern fish sauce, intensely salty, smelly, but beloved. Some texts describe it as a staple in workers' diets, something cheap yet energizing, like the ancient equivalent of instant ramen. The meats were similar: goose, duck, or beef, preserved in slabs, heavily salted until almost rock hard. You watch as one stall-keeper slices a chunk of salted beef and offers samples. It's tough, leathery, and you gnaw at it with effort, but the more you chew, the more flavor emerges. It's not gourmet dining, it's jerky. It makes sense that laborers loved it. You could tuck a strip into your sash and have a ready snack during long hours under the sun. You glance around and see workers haggling for these very rations, paying in small copper pieces or trading grain. Salt was precious, but preserving food made it stretch further, and this was the everyday survival snack. Yet, just as with modern salted chips or jerky, it wasn't the healthiest. Too much salt in the diet left its mark. Archaeologists studying Egyptian mummies found evidence of kidney stress and hypertension-like conditions, silent proof of too many salty bites. Nearby, children chew on small salted fish like candy. They gnash at the bones, grinning with salty teeth, eyes watering from the intensity. Their parents watch, amused, as if it's normal for kids to crave what looks more like dried leather than food. You realize that in its own way, this was Egypt's junk food for kids, cheap, intense, and available everywhere. Historians still debate whether fish jerky was a delicacy for festivals or more of a daily ration. Some papyri list dried fish among offerings for the gods, while others show it in the rations for pyramid workers. Maybe it was both, a sacred snack when dressed up for the temple, and a simple bite for laborers in the fields. As you chew another piece, the salt burns your lips and you crave a drink. No wonder beer was such a natural partner to this food, smooth, foamy, and perfect for washing down the brine. You imagine a worker finishing his shift, sitting by the Nile with a strip of fish jerky and a clay cup of beer, savoring the salty-bitter balance just like someone today might chase salty peanuts with a cold lager. The vendor laughs as you lick your fingers, as though he's seen it 1,000 times before. Salt clings stubbornly to your skin, a reminder that Egypt's junk food could be simple, harsh, but undeniably satisfying. You leave the stall with your thirst growing, the taste of salt still clinging to your tongue like a challenge you'll be chasing all the way to the next snack. Your throat still feels parched, the salt clawing at your tongue, so it's almost a relief when you stumble upon something sweet. A group of children dash past you, their hands sticky and shining, clutching little lumps that glisten golden in the sun. They're licking their fingers with delight, smearing sugarless joy across their faces. You follow the trail of laughter and arrive at a stall stacked high with trays of honey-drenched sweets, ancient Egypt's closest thing to candy. The vendor, an older woman with a bright scarf, leans over her trays and waves you closer. She takes a ball the size of a marble, rolls it between her palms, and offers it up. It's made from ground dates, figs, and nuts, bound together with a generous drizzle of honey. You pop it into your mouth, and immediately, the salt of jerky is replaced with a flood of sweetness. The fruit is chewy, the nuts crunchy, and the honey coats your teeth in sticky layers. It's decadent, almost cloying, and you understand why children are bouncing off the walls nearby. Mainstream fact. Honey was the primary sweetener in ancient Egypt, precious but common enough to show up in everyday cooking. Egyptians called bees the tears of Ra, believing honey carried divine essence. They used it not only in food, but in medicine, ointments, and religious offerings. Honey's antibacterial properties even made it a primitive wound dressing. Snack food and first aid in the same jar. Quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found jars of honey sealed in tombs that are still edible thousands of years later. Picture cracking open King Tut's pantry and finding perfectly spreadable honey waiting like it was made yesterday. That means, theoretically, some honey you taste today could outlive you, your grandchildren, and maybe half of modern civilization. Try saying that about a Snickers bar. Historians still argue whether honey was mostly a luxury for the wealthy or more widely shared. Some texts suggest it was too expensive for commoners, but others point to its use in temple offerings and daily rations. Maybe peasants didn't eat honey-drizzled nuts every day, but during festivals, the sweetness likely spilled across all classes. The woman demonstrates how she makes her sweets. She crushes dates with a stone mortar, sprinkles sesame seeds for texture, and rolls the sticky mash into bite-sized chunks. She then drizzles honey in long, golden threads, catching the sunlight like liquid gold. It looks messy, but her hands move with practiced speed. You wonder how many generations have passed down this exact recipe. From mother to daughter, across centuries. Beside her, another vendor experiments with shapes, flattened discs, twisted braids, even little animals molded from fig paste. Kids squeal as they grab the treats, then lick them into oblivion before running back for more. It's the timeless problem. Once sugar, or, in this case, honey, hits the bloodstream, good luck calming down children. You try another sweet, this one with almonds tucked inside. The crunch breaks the chewy monotony, and the honey dribbles slightly down your chin. You wipe it quickly, pretending you're not just as messy as the kids. But honestly, it's worth the stickiness. It's dessert without refined sugar, candy before candy was invented. And it still works. You notice adults enjoying them too, nibbling with more restraint but clearly savoring every bite. One man remarks that honey is good for the throat, especially after a night of strong beer. You picture him munching these sweets as a hangover cure, the way modern people cling to greasy food after a rough night. Of course, too much honey had its risks. Dental records from mummies show cavities, especially in wealthier classes who could afford more sweets. Imagine living with toothaches and no dentist, all because you couldn't resist fig balls dripping with honey. Still, for most Egyptians, the benefits outweighed the risks. Sweetness was rare, precious, and worth a little pain. You finish your sticky treat and notice how your mood lifts. It's no wonder the Egyptians tied honey to divinity. Something about that golden sweetness makes the world feel lighter, brighter, even when you're standing in a noisy, sun-baked market. You sigh happily, brushing sesame seeds from your robe, and let the sugar buzz carry you onward, deeper into Egypt's junk food wonderland. The sugar high fades just enough for your nose to catch a new, earthier aroma. It drifts between the stalls, faintly sour, slightly funky, and strangely inviting. You follow it into a shaded alley where clay jars line the ground, their surfaces streaked white from dried residue. A vendor cracks one open, and the smell hits you, tangy, fermented, a little like sourdough and a little like forgotten gym socks. Welcome to the world of fermented breads and pickled odds and ends, the ancient Egyptian take on tangy junk food. The vendor pulls out a small round loaf, darker than the golden bread you've seen earlier. He tears it in half and steam escapes, carrying a sharp, acidic tang. You bite cautiously. And the flavor is startling. It's sour, chewy, with a slightly nutty undertone from the emmer wheat. This is no ordinary flatbread, it's sourdough, Egyptian style. Historians widely agree that Egypt was where fermentation in bread-making was first mastered. Someone left dough out too long by accident, yeast snuck in from the air, and boom, humanity's first sourdough starter, mainstream fact. The Egyptians didn't just invent bread, they made it central to their entire food culture. Flatbreads, leavened loaves, and beer all came from the same process of fermentation. You could almost call them the carbohydrate kings of the ancient world. Quirky tidbit. Ancient bakers sometimes flavored their bread with beer dregs. Yes, the foamy leftovers from brewing. The result was a loaf that packed extra tang and maybe even a little tipsiness. Imagine your daily sandwich bread doubling as a microdose of beer. Forget liquid lunch, this was bread with benefits. Historians still argue whether sourdough was an everyday staple for everyone or if common folk mostly ate simpler, unleavened breads. Some scholars think the fancier, fermented loaves were reserved for the wealthy or for festivals, while peasants stuck to plain cakes. Either way, the tangy bite was clearly treasured enough to be offered in tombs alongside meat and honey. As you chew, your eyes wander to other jars, this time filled with vegetables submerged in brine. Pickled cucumbers, radishes, and even turnips float in salty water, faintly tinted with herbs. You sample one, and the crunch is perfect, the tang bursts across your tongue, balancing the earlier sweetness of honey treats. It's instantly familiar, like biting into a modern dill pickle. And that's exactly what it is, the Egyptians loved pickling. Without refrigeration, fermentation was the clever trick that made food last longer. The vendor chuckles at your surprised face and explains, in a mixture of gestures and words, you're not just eating survival food. These pickled odds and ends were beloved snacks, sold at markets, packed into worker rations, and enjoyed at festivals. You imagine pyramid builders gnawing on pickled radishes while stacking limestone blocks, their mouths puckered but their bellies satisfied. You notice a particularly strong jar, pickled fish heads bobbing in cloudy brine. You take a step back. Nose wrinkling, but locals scoop them out happily, chewing through bones and skin with practiced ease. It may not be your idea of junk food, but in this world, it's comfort food with bite. Children crowd around another jar filled with pickled melons, sweet, tangy, almost candy-like in flavor. One boy pulls a piece out with his bare hand, pops it in his mouth, and laughs as juice dribbles down his chin. Pickles, you realize, weren't just grown-up snacks, they crossed every age, every class, every mood. Fermentation didn't stop with bread and pickles, either. Some jars hold strange, mushy bean pastes, tangy from bacterial magic. You taste one, and it's oddly familiar, like a proto-hummus gone sour. Maybe it was eaten with bread, maybe used as a dip. The Egyptians were constantly experimenting, playing with microbes long before they had microscopes, and here's the kicker, modern sourdough bakers still work with microbial strains that resemble those found in 4,000-year-old Egyptian loaves dug up by archaeologists. In other words, when you bite into tangy sourdough today, you might be tasting the very same flavor ancient workers savored on the Nile's banks. That kind of continuity is rare, snack food that literally outlasts dynasties. You finish your pickled radish, lips puckered, and feel a strange satisfaction. Sweet, salty, and sour, Egyptian junk food wasn't just about indulgence. It was about balance, preservation, and maybe a little adventure for the palate. You lick your lips, savoring the sharp tang, and step back into the sun, your stomach humming with flavors that are both ancient and oddly timeless. As the sun tilts lower, casting long shadows across the marketplace, the scents shift once again. You're drawn to a stall where the air smells faintly of nuts, smoke, and a hint of honey. Bowls of roasted and candied nuts beckon, glinting under torchlight that hasn't been lit yet but seems already imagined. Peanuts weren't yet part of the scene, but almonds, pistachios, and sesame seeds take center stage, often roasted, sometimes drizzled with honey, and occasionally coated in a thin dusting of salt or crushed spices. You reach for a handful, and immediately the warm, oily crunch satisfies in a way both simple and complex. Mainstream fact. Nuts were a common snack, portable and high energy, and often paired with honey or dates to make dense, sustaining treats. Egyptian tombs reveal jars of almonds, walnuts, and other nuts, sometimes in preparation for the afterlife. If you were lucky enough to get a handful of these in daily life, you were well fueled for work, or just well fueled for sneaking away from chores. Quirky tidbit. Some Egyptians believed certain nuts carried symbolic or magical properties. Almonds, for example, were associated with fertility and protection. Kids sometimes carried a small nut in their pocket, like a tiny talisman, practically a medieval fidget toy that also happened to be edible. You can imagine a child grinding their nut into the dirt between bites, then popping it back in their mouth because, why not? Historians still argue whether nut-based snacks were more for the wealthy or widespread across classes. Some evidence suggests commoners had access to nuts, but not always freshly roasted or honey-coated. The version you're eating is likely a festival or market day indulgence, a special occasion treat. You scoop a small bowl of honey-roasted sesame seeds. Tiny, sticky, sweet, and nutty all at once, they clump together in perfect handfuls. The crunch hits your teeth with a satisfying bite, and the honey melts instantly, coating your tongue in sugar and oil. You can feel the energy spike, as if your body recognizes this combination as concentrated power, ancient fast food engineered for survival, and pure pleasure. Nearby, a merchant roasts walnuts over coals, turning them constantly so they don't burn. The smell is intoxicating, warm, woody, faintly bitter and sweet all at once. He sprinkles them with salt, then rolls them in crushed dates, forming sticky clusters that children and adults alike scoop greedily into their palms. You pick up one cluster and bite down. The crunch of the walnut gives way to chewy date sweetness, all held together by sticky honey. It's basically a proto-candy bar. Centuries before chocolate bars existed, the stall's popularity is clear. Children dart around, laughing, sticky hands marking every surface. Parents barter for larger bags, promising treats later, while elderly women pick over small piles, selecting nuts to roast at home for tea or pastries. You notice a young girl popping a sesame-coated almond into her mouth and immediately grimacing at the stickiness before grinning, sugar all over her face. Historians still debate whether these honeyed nuts were strictly festive or incorporated into daily life. Some jars found in tombs suggest long-term storage for rituals, while evidence from ordinary houses shows they were sometimes baked or roasted for snacks. Perhaps, like modern candy, they walked the line between indulgence and necessity, something to celebrate, energize, or simply enjoy when the day demanded it. You bite into another cluster, savoring the complex textures, crunchy nuts, sticky honey, a faint tang from sesame. It's indulgent, and you notice your hands are smeared with sticky residue despite your best efforts. You smile at the messiness, it's part of the fun. Ancient junk food wasn't tidy. It was meant to be experienced fully, eaten on the move, shared in markets, and savored between sips of beer or dribbles of honey. As the light begins to fade, you realize that nuts are the perfect bridge between sweet, salty, and savory, rounding out the Egyptian junk food spectrum. From honey cakes to salted fish, pickled radishes to fried dough, nuts tie everything together, portable, calorie-dense, and endlessly tweakable. You lick your sticky fingers, grateful for this little treasure of crunch and sweetness, and feel yourself drifting toward the next stage of the market, already anticipating what other flavors await. The sun dips lower now, and a cooler breeze drifts off the Nile, carrying the faint scent of smoke, spice, and something sweetly fermented. You follow it to a quieter section of the market, where clay pots and woven baskets hold fruit preserves and syrups, the ancient Egyptian equivalent of jam and dessert sauces. The colors are vivid, deep reds of pomegranate molasses, golden yellow date syrup, and dark, rich fig paste. It smells sticky, heady, and intoxicating, enough to make you forget about your sticky hands from honeyed nuts. Mainstream fact. Egyptians preserved fruit in sugarless syrups made from dates, figs, or even carob, creating concentrated sweeteners that could be drizzled on bread, cakes, or eaten straight as treats. These syrups were a vital part of their culinary culture, offering concentrated energy and flavor in an otherwise grain-heavy diet. Quirky tidbit: some jars reveal that these syrups were sometimes fermented, producing a faint alcoholic tang. Think of it as fruit-flavored meat concentrate, a dessert and a tiny buzz all in one. You can practically imagine ancient kids sneaking a lick and feeling slightly giddy, whispering about magic juice while adults nodded knowingly. Historians still argue whether these preserves were everyday fare or reserved for festivals and temples. Archaeological finds in modest homes suggest some level of daily consumption. But grand jars in tombs point toward ceremonial importance. The dual purpose, practical snack and divine offering, blurs the line between mundane indulgence and sacred ritual. You dip a finger into thick date syrup and taste it. The sweetness is intense, almost overwhelming, but somehow comforting. It clings to your tongue, coats your mouth, and leaves a lingering flavor that makes you want more. In a world without refined sugar, this is about as sweet as anything can get, a concentrated reminder that sugar was once a rare luxury, not an everyday commodity. Nearby, a young vendor demonstrates how to roll small dates in crushed nuts, then drizzle them with syrup, forming tiny candies that glisten like jewels. Children reach eagerly, giggling as they snag the sticky morsels before they're even fully formed. The texture is complex, chewy, nutty, and sweet, a combination that resonates surprisingly well with modern taste buds. You notice some preserves flavored with herbs, like mint or coriander, giving the syrup an unexpected twist. The contrast of sweetness with subtle spice creates a more sophisticated experience, like the Egyptians were experimenting with flavor profiles centuries before dessert menus existed. You take another bite, imagining yourself at a festival. Weaving through the stalls with sticky fingers, tasting everything in sight, some jars hold fig paste mixed with pomegranate juice, almost like a natural fruit leather. You tear a piece and chew slowly, appreciating the tart-sweet balance. It's portable, long-lasting, and energizing, the perfect companion for a long day of labor or travel. Ancient Egyptians clearly understood the power of fruit as snack, dessert, and fuel all in one, and then there's the showstopper, pomegranate molasses so thick it slides slowly from a spoon. You scoop a bit and let it melt on your tongue. The flavor is deep, tart, and slightly bitter, a perfect counterpoint to the earlier honey, nuts, and fried dough. You realize this is a snack for grown-ups, a flavor meant to linger in the memory, just like a fine dessert today. As you step back, wiping your fingers on your linen robe, you notice how this section of the market almost feels like a shrine to sweetness itself. Dates, figs, pomegranate, all transformed through syrup or paste, each bite a mini celebration of flavor. The Egyptians had mastered preservation, concentration, and indulgence, creating junk food that nourished, delighted, and, occasionally, inspired sticky fingers. The sun sets completely, leaving you in warm twilight, and you feel the combined effects of sugar, salt, oil, and spice working through your body. Each flavor lingers in memory, a mosaic of indulgence that spans from laborers' rations to temple delicacies. You pause for a moment, savoring the sticky, tangy, sweet, and nutty notes, realizing that ancient Egypt's junk food culture is surprisingly sophisticated, yet profoundly human. Night has fallen now, and the market takes on a quieter, more intimate rhythm. Lanterns flicker along narrow alleyways, casting a warm glow over jars, baskets, and trays of snacks. You notice a subtle but unmistakable smell rising from one corner, a rich, nutty, almost smoky scent. Here, you encounter Egyptian sweets baked with nuts and honey, the kind of treats that combine everything you've tasted so far into concentrated, handheld bites. A vendor slides a tray closer. Each piece is golden brown, sticky, and studded with almonds, sesame seeds, and sometimes tiny dates. You pick one up and bite. It's dense, chewy, and clings to your teeth. The honey seeps slowly, the nuts provide satisfying crunch. And the occasional bit of dried fruit adds bursts of sweet intensity. It's decadent, far from the simple bread and figs you first encountered, and yet utterly approachable, like junk food for grown-ups who crave flavor and texture in every bite. Mainstream fact. Egyptians commonly combined honey and nuts in pastries or simple confections. These were often made for festivals, temple offerings, or as gifts. The combination of fat, sugar, and protein created a high-energy snack ideal for long days under the sun or for nourishment during ritual activities. Quirky tidbit. Some recipes incorporated ingredients that sound bizarre today, like ground dates mixed with tiny amounts of natron, the same mineral used in mummification. This may have helped preserve the treats longer, but it also made them a little salty or alkaline, a taste you might find strange if you tried it. Imagine your favorite candy with a faint hint of cleaning product. Somehow, the Egyptians thought it was worth it. Historians still argue whether these sweet nut pastries were meant primarily for human consumption or if some were intended as offerings for the gods. Tombs reveal trays and jars left beside mummies, suggesting dual purposes, a snack for the living and a treat for eternity. Either way, their meticulous construction shows that care, ritual, and flavor often went hand in hand. You watch the vendor press some of the mixture into small molds, forming animal shapes and symbolic icons. Kids squeal in delight, pointing at lions, birds, and scarabs. The pieces are sticky, but the texture is engaging, soft and chewy with crunchy highlights. Each bite is a little adventure, a collision of flavors and sensations that feels almost modern despite being thousands of years old. Nearby, roasted figs are stuffed with ground nuts and drizzled with date syrup. You taste one, and it's almost like a tiny, elongated candy bar, sweet, sticky, and dense, packing an energy punch with every chew. You can see why festival goers would crowd around these stalls, hands reaching, children tugging at parents, everyone wanting just one more bite. Some pieces are flavored with subtle spices, cinnamon, coriander, or even rose water. The aroma rises, mingling with the nutty sweetness, creating an olfactory layer that makes your stomach growl despite your growing fullness. You realize that Egyptians weren't just aiming for nourishment, they were crafting a full sensory experience. The market hums with quiet laughter, children sharing treats, adults sampling honeyed nut confections after the day's work. It feels less chaotic than earlier, more intimate, as if the nighttime has softened the textures of both market and crowd. You notice a few workers nibbling leftover treats while gossiping in corners, savoring the sticky bites as they recount tales from earlier in the day. You try one last piece, letting the sticky honey melt slowly, the nuts crunching satisfyingly. The flavors mingle in your mouth, sweet, nutty, slightly smoky, with faint spice lingering. You lean back against a stall post, watching lantern light shimmer across the trays, and realize that in ancient Egypt, junk food was not just a luxury or indulgence, it was a way of life. From street snacks to ceremonial treats, from sticky honey balls to nut-studded pastries, every bite carried culture, flavor, and a little bit of human joy. The night grows deeper, and you wander toward the edge of the market, where the aromas shift once more, this time toward something smokier, richer, and oddly satisfying. Here lie the savory spiced meat snacks, Egypt's take on something like jerky, but with more flair and seasoning than what you saw earlier. Small strips of roasted or grilled meat hang on skewers, rubbed with salt, coriander, cumin, and sometimes a drizzle of honey for contrast. You inhale deeply, the scent alone makes your stomach rumble in anticipation. A vendor hands you a skewer, and the meat is warm from the coals. You bite down, and the texture is firm but yielding. The spices hit your tongue immediately, cumin's warmth, coriander's earthiness, and just a hint of honeyed sweetness rounding it out. It's sticky in some spots, chewy in others, and you realize it's the perfect combination of flavors and textures, a handheld feast in miniature. Mainstream fact. Meat was often preserved and spiced to extend its shelf life. Spices weren't just for flavor, they helped mask the taste of meat that wasn't entirely fresh, while also adding nutritional benefits. Laborers, soldiers, and travelers relied on these snacks for long days when cooking wasn't possible. Quirky tidbit. Some recipes suggest Egyptians even experimented with unusual spice combinations, coriander mixed with dried figs, or cumin rubbed on fish strips before smoking. Imagine the surprise of biting into something tangy, sweet, and savory all at once. It might sound strange, but taste was experimental long before fusion cuisine became a trendy label. Historians still argue whether these spiced meat snacks were primarily for everyday workers or if they were reserved for travelers and festival goers. Archaeological evidence points to both. Small strips of spiced meat appear in tombs and in workers' quarters alike, suggesting a snack that crossed social boundaries. You chew slowly, savoring each bite, the spices lingering pleasantly. Around you, people nibble eagerly, laughing, gesturing, comparing the spicing techniques of one vendor to another. You notice children trying to mimic the adults, cautiously tasting spiced fish and meat strips, their faces contorting at first before the flavors settle into something familiar. It's an early lesson in the joys and risks of adventurous eating. Nearby, another stall features roasted grain sprinkled with crushed cumin and coriander, a dry, crunchy snack meant to complement the meat. You take a handful, tossing it into your mouth, and the flavors explode together, savory, earthy, slightly bitter, a perfect balance to the richer, stickier meat. You realize that Egyptian junk food was about contrasts, sweet and salty, soft and crunchy, smoky and tangy, all mingling on the palate in playful harmony. The night air carries the scent of roasting meat, honey, and spices across the market. Vendors laugh with one another, exchanging samples, testing recipes, and joking about which spice combinations will become the next big hit. You bite off another strip, your teeth sinking into the tender, seasoned flesh, and feel a strange kinship with these ancient snackers. Despite the centuries separating you, the joy of tasting something bold and flavorful is the same. You glance at the fading lanterns, the slow hum of the river in the distance, and realize that the Egyptians understood indulgence. Junk food wasn't just about filling the stomach, it was about experimenting, sharing, celebrating, and sometimes cheating a little, whether with honey, oil, or spice. You lick your fingers, savoring the lingering flavors, and take a deep breath. The market is winding down, but your memory of taste, aroma, and texture is vivid, almost as if you've carried a small piece of Egypt in your mouth. By now, the market is quieting almost entirely. Torches gutter and smoke curls lazily into the cool night air. You find yourself in a small corner where a few final vendors linger, their trays holding the leftover festival treats and experimental snacks, the ancient Egyptian limited edition junk food. Small portions of honeyed figs, spiced nuts, roasted grains, and sticky pastries are arranged in rough order, remnants of the day's indulgence. You pick up a small piece of honey-and-egg confection, sticky and dense, and let it melt slowly on your tongue. Mainstream fact. Festival foods were often richer, sweeter, and more elaborate than daily fare. Egyptians took advantage of celebrations, religious observances, and temple feasts to enjoy treats that ordinary workers might rarely see. Honey, nuts, spices, and oil were combined in inventive ways that transformed simple ingredients into indulgent bites. Quirky tidbit. Some leftover festival treats were deliberately left for wandering spirits or minor gods, a ritual you could interpret as early recycling or perhaps a supernatural taste test panel. Imagine small bits of sticky dough and spiced nuts being set aside overnight, not for humans, but for invisible guests. Historians still argue whether these leftover experimental snacks influenced daily cooking practices or remained purely ceremonial. Some evidence suggests that clever street vendors replicated festival treats for commoners, creating a blurred line between sacred indulgence and everyday snacking. You try another bite, this one spiced with cinnamon and sesame, and your eyes widen slightly. The flavors are intricate, sweet, nutty, warm, and earthy. Even as the market empties, the energy of human ingenuity and culinary creativity is palpable. The Egyptians were not only industrious builders of pyramids and temples but also architects of taste, using every sensory trick available to make food memorable. Nearby, a jar of pickled vegetables catches your eye. You pop a small piece of radish into your mouth, the tangy crunch offsetting the lingering sweetness of honeyed confections. It's a reminder that even ancient junk food balanced contrasts, sweet with sour, soft with crunchy, fatty with chewy, long before modern snack manufacturers codified these rules. Children, now tired, sit quietly with sticky fingers, sharing scraps, laughing softly at small jokes only they understand. Adults converse in low tones, occasionally sampling bites, savoring the last flavors of the day. You notice that even the simplest morsel, a leftover honey ball, a spiced nut, carries social weight. It's shared. It's appreciated, it's enjoyed together. You bite into one final piece, dense with honey, nuts, and a whisper of spice. The flavors coat your tongue and settle warmly in your stomach. The Nile's slow murmur reaches your ears, and the market's fading glow reflects off your eyelids. You feel a connection to countless Egyptians before you, all enjoying small moments of indulgence, all finding joy in sticky, sweet, or spiced bites. As you rise to leave, the sticky residue on your fingers and the lingering taste in your mouth remind you that Egypt's junk food wasn't just food, it was culture, experimentation, and sheer human delight, wrapped in honey, spice, and ingenuity. The market sleeps. The torches dim, and the memory of flavor carries you forward, a gentle echo of an ancient world that thrived on taste as much as labor. The night is calm now. The market has emptied, but the scents linger: sweet honey, earthy nuts, smoky spices, and the faint tang of pickled vegetables. You sit quietly on a low stone, your fingers sticky, your stomach full, and the memory of flavor vivid. The Nile murmurs nearby, its waters reflecting the pale moonlight, and for a moment, you feel suspended in time, part of a world both ancient and astonishingly alive. Breathe in slowly, letting the warmth of roasted grains, the sweetness of honey, and the sharp tang of pickled radish settle in your senses. The chaos of the market has faded into a gentle hum, the distant laughter of children, the occasional clink of clay pots, the soft hiss of coals cooling from the day's cooking. Even in the darkness, the ingenuity and joy of Egyptian snack makers are palpable, a reminder that humans have always sought pleasure in small, edible moments. Think of the honeyed pastries, sticky and dense, the spiced meats, smoky and bold, the nuts, roasted and crunchy, and the fermented breads and pickled vegetables, tangy and complex. Each flavor, each texture, was a choice, a statement, a fleeting moment of delight. Ancient Egypt's junk food was more than sustenance, it was experimentation, celebration, and comfort. It connected people, gave energy to laborers, sweetened festivals, and sometimes even tickled the divine. Now, let your thoughts drift further. Imagine walking away from the lantern-lit market, the cool night brushing against your face, the flavors lingering, comforting and warm. The sticky sweetness, the salty tang, the spicy warmth, they settle in memory as softly as the Nile's flow. You carry a sense of human continuity, the same joy in snacks, the same playful indulgence, bridging millennia between you and those long-ago marketgoers. Let your body relax, your eyelids grow heavy. The scents and tastes remain in your imagination, fading slowly into dreamlike whispers. Ancient Egypt's culinary delights, from honeyed sweets to pickled tangs, merge with your own quiet breathing. You are part of the rhythm now, the gentle ebb of history and flavor, the soft echo of humanity's eternal fascination with taste. Sleep now, let the sticky, sweet, smoky, tangy, and spiced memories cradle you, and drift gently into the comfort of night, carried by the flavors of a civilization long gone but never forgotten.